Thanks for coming. Welcome. I was telling someone earlier, I was just surprised to see how many folks showed up to liturgy when it was -8 when I left home. And everyone here today, it's wonderful. So thanks for coming. We hope this will be helpful, the whole series. Obviously, you know there are several more of these presentations scheduled through winter and spring. This one today is on healthy communication. Did everyone get a handout? Or there's some handouts going around if you need them. And maybe if anyone comes in late, if you guys could hand them a handout. So just by way of introduction, what I'll be presenting today regarding healthy relationships or healthy communication. Relationships is next time. But this healthy communication can be applied to any relationship. It's not just for you and your spouse. It can apply to your children. It should apply to your boss, your coworkers, your adult siblings, hopefully anyone, even the stranger, an encounter with a stranger. So hopefully this will be applicable to many areas of your lives. And you do have an outline of what I'll be speaking about. Hopefully that'll just help you follow along. Help you remember some things we talked about. Yeah, you can take notes if you want, but again, you can take that home with you, and hopefully if some things stand out to you, you'll have a reference to look at. And as you see from the outline, there's sort of two parts to my presentation. The first part is on our individual responsibility in healthy communication, and the second part, we'll be looking at interpersonal aspects of healthy communication. After each of those parts, part one, part two, I'll have a time for questions. But as we go along, if you have a question or something's not clear, just raise your hand. This is meant to be pretty informal, so feel free to ask a question, okay, as we go. So starting with part one, individual responsibility and healthy communication. Yeah, first we're going to focus on ourselves, our own contributions to healthy communication. What can we do differently? What can we improve upon? Obviously, communication involves more than one person, but we as individuals are responsible for what we do and say. One of our greatest freedoms is to decide what we initiate with someone and how we respond to others. These are the only things we have control over. We don't have control over what the other person says and does. So we're going to go through a few things that we can focus on where you can sort of challenge yourself as to whether you might need to grow in this area or things you can learn to do differently. First one has to do with the loudness of our speech or firmness. I want to try to distinguish between those two. So I'm just going to ask some questions and let you just think about them first as we start. Are you aware of how loud your speech is or how loud it gets at times when you're communicating with someone? Especially, does your voice get louder when you're frustrated, angry, or feeling attacked? Are you truly free to choose to change that, to lower your volume when appropriate, and yet still speak firmly when needed? So when you think about that, what's the appropriate use of volume when you communicate with someone? Yes, it may vary depending on the situation. For example, most of us would probably say, if a child ran out into the street and was about to get hit by a car, you'd probably yell at him to get back on the curbing. That would be very appropriate to avert a tragedy. But we also all probably have a sense that it's inappropriate to shout or yell at someone when we might be trying to intimidate them or control them or coerce them into something. Make sense? We sort of have that sense of what's right and wrong. So how do you think, and this is where I'd like some feedback, how do you think the other person feels when you yell at them? Or how do you feel when someone yells at you? Just what are some initial reactions or responses to that? How do you feel? Yeah?
Defensive.
I'm sorry? Defensive. Can everyone hear? Maybe try to speak up. Other ideas? How do you feel? What?
Overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed? Yeah?
Irritated.
Yeah?
Sad.
Yeah. Sad?
What did I do?
Huh, what did I do? Yeah. Okay. So, given those feelings, and let me just jump back to the examples I gave, like the child who ran into the street and their parent yelled at them to get back, they may feel loved and cared for, right? Because it was an appropriate use of the volume in one's voice to do that. Whereas the person that you may be trying to control or manipulate or doing something inappropriate, some of these feelings you just shared might be appropriate. They may feel resentful, is another word. So, in contrast to loudness, I'd like you to consider firmness of speech as something different and maybe quite appropriate at times in different situations. Let's say you've said no to someone and they keep bugging you and pressing you. It may be appropriate to say no, again, very firmly, right? Because you mean no. And it doesn't have to be louder, I guess is my point. It can be firm. So think about, what does firmness connote to you? What does it mean to you? Any thoughts? What does firmness mean? Okay?
Conviction.
Conviction? Yes. What else? Anything else?
You're serious?
Serious? Yes. Some other words I came up with are determined, resolute, decisive. It's just a clearer communication of what you mean when you're firm than when you're loud, okay? Just something to consider. Have you ever heard of kind firmness? It sounds sort of contradictory, doesn't it?
You say kind?
Kind, K-I-N-D, kind firmness. It's being kind and firm at the same time. An example might be telling your child who's begging you to do something, I love you, Susie, and the answer is no. Or here's another example. I know you'd rather watch TV than do your homework, and homework comes first. So the point here is you're exhibiting some understanding and acknowledgement of their feelings when you're kind first, and yet you stick to the boundary that you've set. Make sense? Okay. Let's talk about tone of voice. It's a little different than volume. Tone is the way the speaker comes across, and it has to do with your attitude toward the other person. Your tone. There's an underlying message there in your tone. It can be subtle or overt. And obviously there are times where we use our tone inappropriately. Let's say our tone is demeaning, condescending, rude, intimidating, aggressive, forceful. These tones are not healthy. Why do you think I'm saying they're not healthy? What are you thinking? Come on, folks. Not cold in here. Yeah, what?
Rooted in pride?
Rooted in pride? Yeah.
Full shutdown communication?
Yes, it does. Tell me more about pride. What else is going on here when we come across to someone that way? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Belittlement? Mm-hmm. Anything else? I would say, yes, pride is, I think, the source of it. I think we can also say that when we put someone else down with those words I just used, you're making yourself better than they are. It's what has to do with what Father Evan was talking about this morning. You're making yourself better than they are when you put someone else down with this attitude. And our faith tells us this too. We're not better than anyone else, right? So be careful with your tone. You may want to check that in your communications. What are appropriate tones? Generally, an appropriate tone does convey respect, humility, as Father talked about today, curiosity, concern, things like that, where you value the other person. So again, keep in mind that tone reflects your attitude toward the other person. And it doesn't mean that you can't express your emotion. So just as an aside, if you're feeling frustrated or angry or fear, it doesn't mean you can't express that emotion appropriately, but the tone is how you see the other person. So an appropriate tone it means that no matter what you're feeling, that your attitude is one of acceptance and respect for the other person. And you're recognizing ultimately that the other person is made in the image of God, right? Created in God's image. Your tone of voice can make a lasting impression on those around you. Again, it can be very subtle, but you could grow up, if your parent has a tone of condescension, to learn to not value yourself. Anyway, there's all kinds of implications here. So, tone's important. Moving on to nonverbal communication. Nonverbal communication isn't good and bad in of itself, but it can be healthy or unhealthy. Let's talk more about it. If you want to connect with someone or show interest in them, what are some nonverbal indications of that? Again, I'm asking you to throw out some ideas here. Eye contact. Nodding. Something else? Smiling.
Frowning.
That's if you don't want to connect with them, right? I was going to get to that question, Chris. Anyway, so yes, good ideas. You might face them. There are other things that are a little more subtle, like turning to face the person, but you've named a lot of them.
Well, put your phone down.
There you go. Put your phone down. Yes. So I guess my point here is to be aware of these things. We tend to do them sort of naturally, but on the other hand, if you're not intentional about it, you might give a mixed message or the wrong message, or you're looking at your phone, you give the message you're not interested, right? So what about if you are disinterested or upset, or what are some nonverbal indications of that? Just plain okay. Not very enthusiastic response, right? What else? Just crossing your arms. What else? Looking away. Yeah, we tend to look away at our phones, right? So, yes, that's another good one. Yeah. Shaking your head, gritting your teeth. There are all kinds of things, and again, we may do them very subconsciously, but the idea is to be more intentional. Decide, how do you want to interact with this person? How do you want to communicate to them non-verbally?
Don't roll your eyes when your wife is talking to you.
If you didn't hear that, don't roll your eyes if your wife is talking to you. Yeah, right. That's a wise man back there. So my challenge to you is to check your body language. Try to be aware of it. Does your body language say what you really want it to say with the person you're interacting with? And if it's saying something negative, like you're trying to control the person or you're being punitive, you probably need to change that. Yes?
It's also easier to pay attention if your body language sets it up easier to focus.
Good point, Alec. If you're orienting yourself, looking at the person, nodding, you're probably going to be more likely to do what you really want to do. Listen. Yeah. Okay. So just be aware, consider making changes. Next on your outline is silence. And as you see on the outline, I'm going to differentiate between silent treatment and reflective silence. This is nonverbal communication, silence, but it's a very special type. And again, it can be either healthy or unhealthy. Let's take a look at it. What is the silent treatment? Have you been the recipient of that? What do you think I mean by that?
Punishing someone by not talking to them.
Yes, ignoring them. Angry silence.
Glaring.
I'm sorry, what?
Glaring.
Glaring. Yeah. Anything else? Turning away.
Refusing to answer them.
Another good one, refusing to answer. This type of silence, again, you've probably heard the term silent treatment. It does connote that you're being punitive. You're being mean, maybe. Or you wish to punish the person or seek revenge, or your anger is getting the best of you. It also usually means we're resentful. And when we have resentment in our hearts, We cannot have love, humility, gentleness, wisdom. They can't exist at the same time, right? So consider that. It's not just sort of unhealthy in and of itself, but you can't exhibit the opposite virtues, traits that God calls us to consider. There's also such a thing as I call reflective silence. It's a healthy type of silence, so I want you to consider when it may be appropriate. You may decide that you need time to think about something or to pray about something, or perhaps the other person is escalating or inappropriate in some way, and you decide you don't wish to willingly subject yourself to that, which is a good choice, by the way. But whatever the case, a reflective silence, a healthy disengagement can be quite appropriate. And if you are choosing to do that, I do strongly suggest it's important to tell the other person what you're doing and why, so they don't misinterpret it as silent treatment, okay, or something punitive. So you may say something like, I'm feeling pretty stressed right now, and I'm going to take some time to think about this. I'll let you know when I'm ready to talk, okay? You decide. So an important corollary here is you don't need the other's permission or agreement to do this. You decide, you discern if it's healthy to do this. You don't need to say, a lot of times people say, could we please stop talking? Could we please, I'm tired of arguing, could we please stop? You don't need to do that. You stop. You have control over you. Do it healthily, do it considerately, but you do it. Then yes, spend some time thinking, praying, considering, when might I be ready to talk about this again? But my point is, you're free to do it when you think it would be healthy. Am I making sense there? Any questions about that? And the reason I'm saying tell the person you're talking to again is so you hope they understand that you're doing this for a good reason. But if they don't get it, if they say, why can't you talk? You still do it. You're still responsible for yourself to do something that's healthy in that moment. You don't need to explain, well, because you're yelling at me. Just like I said is a good term. Like I said, I'll talk to you later. Be kind, be considerate. I call it healthy disengagement when you wish to engage in reflective silence. Any questions about that? Just before we go along.
It could also include a pause and listen,
Yeah, it could. You're right. Pause.
so you're not interrupting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we'll get to some of that listening stuff in a little bit. So, okay. Well, thoughts and emotions. I do need water. Hang on. Sharing what you think is different than sharing what you feel. Both are important. But consider when you share your thoughts to also share your feelings, if appropriate, and vice versa. We tend to sort of lean one way or the other, like be more of a thinking person or more of a feeling person. You have thoughts and feelings, but we tend to sort of be better, I guess, or it comes more naturally to do one or the other. Does that make sense to you? Can you say, like, are you more of a feeling person or thinking person? How many people think you're more of a feeling person? Just raise your hand. Okay. And how many think you're more of a thinking person? Okay. Or maybe you don't know. It's okay. I'm just saying there's this tendency, and again, neither's right nor wrong, but the point is if you tend to be one way, you sort of miss out on the other, or you don't tend to get in touch with that as much. In couples, we tend to be the opposite, but not necessarily. And we also tend to think that women are more emotional and men are more thinking. That's not always the case, so let's not stereotype. In fact, Mike and I joke all the time. He's more of a feeling person, and I'm more the thinker. But it really works well when we, share those different points of view to figure out something, when we tend to be more one way than the other. So let me just give you an example, quick example. Let's say that and I'll just say Mike and I, let's say we're discussing how much time to spend at my sister-in-law's. Mike doesn't have a sister, so I'm making this up, okay? When we go back to Virginia on vacation. And so I tell Mike that I'd just like to spend 1 day with his sister, and he'd like to spend 4. It's his sister. We need to stay 4, So he's more feeling, and I'm thinking, I want to get to Uncle Joe's, and I want to, here's the plan. Here's what we're going to do. And so we're sharing our thoughts about the issue. Mike's sharing more feelings. I'm sharing more thoughts. But again, if we just stay in that rational, logical place, we're not going deeper into what we're really feeling, especially me, who's, planning the itinerary. So if I allow myself to really get in touch with my feelings and have the courage to state to Mike that why I only want to stay 1 night at his sister's, it's because I really feel intimidated by her, and it's uncomfortable for me. And I just don't want to be there for very long. So it's just simply how I feel, let's say. And but it does open up the door to discuss this in a deeper way. I hope by sharing my feelings, Mike may understand me better. And when he shares his, that I may understand him better. And notice when I said, I feel intimidated or I feel uncomfortable, I focused on how I feel, not that his sister's a jerk or something. You don't need to say that. You just say, here's how I feel. And I think one other thing about feelings is to remember that we don't need to argue about feelings or dispute someone else's feelings. Feelings just are. They're neither right nor wrong. Yes, we can express them inappropriately. Scripture says, be angry and sin not. Right? So, okay to be angry. God made us with the ability to think and to feel. And again, my point is it's important to get in touch with both, especially when you're communicating with someone and you want to know their thoughts and feelings also. This next section has to do with what's really important in any situation, especially when we have a disagreement or difference of opinion. The idea is to sort of step back and ask yourself, what's really important here? Might we consider having some curiosity and empathy for what the other person is thinking and feeling, what's going on with them? And might we consider even the bigger picture, that we are to love God and to love others and to be kind to one another? And how can you communicate this love and kindness even when you're talking about a difficult topic like where you're going on vacation? I mentioned in my introduction that the material I'm presenting today is applicable in any type of relationship, even with a stranger. So I'm going to tell you a brief encounter I had with a stranger just 2 weeks ago. I was shopping at Costco, and when I finished, got in my car, started up the motor, and I was thinking about, boy, Lord, I need to get home and work on this presentation on healthy communication. I need to work on this. Help me. And little did I know that the Lord was going to answer my prayer right then with a real-life example to share with you today. Because as I was backing out of this parking space, I forgot that Mike had just added to the back of our 4Runner a hitch, about a foot long. You know what's happened next. Just forgot. So, of course, I heard a bump, and it turns out that the hitch, scraped the bumper of another car who was, parked in the lane between the parking places, ready to pull into a parking place, So he was parked, I was moving. So the man in the other vehicle got out of his car, very irate, screaming at me. So his voice was loud, back to all the things we just talked about. His voice was loud, his tone was very condescending, his nonverbal communication, shaking his fist, raising his arms. He called me stupid and other things I won't repeat. So he was quite livid. His emotions were quite livid. I don't think he was thinking very well, but his emotions were there. Somehow, by God's grace, I was able to stay calm and take care of the usual necessities like, here's my information, here's my phone number, insurance, all that. And, he's still yelling and upset. And I was able to look into his eyes and say, "Sir, I can't tell you how sorry I am that I backed into your car. And I will report it to my insurance company. I'll take full responsibility. It was my fault. And I'll make sure that they fix your car." And he was really taken aback. Like, you're not supposed to admit that you were wrong in an accident. And I said it in all sincerity. And he seemed to calm down a bit. But then he got upset. He just couldn't let go of his anger. And he said, "I bet you didn't give me your correct phone number. I'm going to call it right now." And so he dials my number, and it rings. And so he calmed down a little more, but again, he just couldn't let go of his anger. The next thing he said very angrily is, "I'm going to take photos of this and send them to your insurance company." So he pulls out his phone to take, pictures of the damage, and his phone didn't work. Or the camera, I should say, didn't work on his phone. So he got more enraged, more four-letter words. So I got my phone out and I said, "Sir, I'll take the photos." And I did, and I took a picture of my license plate and did a close-up of the big scrape, and he seemed sort of shocked that I was doing that. And then I said, "I'll text these to you right now," and I did. And when we parted ways, he seemed less angry, even a bit calm. And later on that day, he texted me, asking, what about the insurance? And I told him that I had reported the accident, that I told the insurance I took full responsibility. Here's the name of the agent and her email and her phone number, and here's the claim number. And he texted back. He was very kind, and he thanked me. So the point of me sharing this incident isn't that I handled it perfectly. I told you what I did and said, but I didn't tell you what I was thinking and feeling. I'm not telling you that. I just know I need to work on that. God spoke to me. Need to work on that. But I was able to be calm in the face of his anger and kind in the face of his unkindness. And perhaps the man decided to be a little more kind himself. And I think that's the point here is we have a responsibility to communicate healthily no matter what the other person says or does. And what we do and say affects another person. Yeah, what?
Proverbs, a soft answer turns away wrath.
Very good. Yes, good scripture to remember. So again, point is how we communicate has an effect on another person. Let's talk about reaction versus response, because what I felt that man was doing was reacting, very instantaneous. I'd like you to consider that everything we do in communicating with others is learned behavior. We've learned to do this. And if our behaviors have been learned, we can unlearn them. It's not just the way I am. That's a poor excuse. In fact, when we automatically react, like apparently that man did, verbally and emotionally to something that someone says, it's probably something that we have learned to do. And again, maybe it was modeled by a parent in childhood. Perhaps you learned it as a defense. We don't need to go into all that. But the point is you learned it somehow. And we call it a conditioned reaction, meaning it's learned. You've got conditioned over time to do this. And it does sort of become the way you are, right? But it can be changed. So if we have some unhealthy habits, they can be unlearned. You can retrain yourself to replace those old habits with healthier habits in your communications. In other words, we can learn a healthy response, which is something we choose to say and do. So It's just a little semantic thing to keep in your head, react versus respond. You know, you can choose a healthy response to something and learn to do it more consistently over time. How do you get there? It does take time, patience, practice to change habits. And if you pray, Lord, change me, I sort of doubt he's going to zap you and change you instantaneously. He can do that. I believe he can do anything. But if you pray, Lord, help me do the hard work of changing, then we have Christ as our advocate walking alongside us to help us change. As Father Evan has reminded us many times, even today, when we fall down, what? We get back up. And I printed on the handout something St. Anthony said. If you wish, you can be a slave of passions. And if you wish, you can remain free and not submit to their yoke. For God has created you in that power, with that power. So my takeaway on this part one, on individual responsibility and healthy communication, is we have control over how we initiate communication with others and how we respond to others, and we can change. Questions, discussion, reflections on part one? What do you think?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
In your example, did you ever feel threatened by the gentleman? And if that feeling had come up, I know you talked about not doing the silent treatment, but what's the healthy way to distance yourself from a terrifying situation?
Excellent
For lack of a
question.
better word?
In the situation I was in, I didn't feel threatened. There were other people around. In fact, several people were saying, will you please move out the way, you know. And the guy just wouldn't, you know, I'd try to, anyway. So I didn't feel threatened. But it's a great question. If you do feel threatened, you might need to healthily disengage. You know, you might need to say, I'm going to sit in my car now and call my insurance company, you know, or, yeah, I would say get away, you know, healthily. But by healthy, I mean, you know, you don't say, you know, the hell with you, I'm out of here. Just you say, you know, yeah, I'm gonna leave now, or you just leave. Does that make sense to folks? If again, not say that's a different situation, but a great thing, it requires discernment, yeah, as to what you might do or say in any given situation. Other thoughts, questions, reflections? Yeah.
This might take us down too long of a bunny trail, so let me know if that's the case. But you mentioned that people oftentimes find it easier to communicate thoughts or emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I think it isn't just a matter of communication, but of being in touch with that other side of yourself. So do you have any practical tips that you could give to become in touch with emotions or thoughts, depending on which side of the spectrum you fall on?
That's a real good question, Anna. You know, there are exercises. You probably can find stuff online. You know, in counseling, we might do some things. Yeah, I can't really go into that here. But great question. If you have trouble even being aware of them, that's the first step. How do you increase your awareness? And I would just say there are ways to work on that without really going into it. And, you know, maybe ask feedback from someone else, or you know, someone you trust to give you some feedback, like, yeah, you always are, you know, telling me how you feel, but I don't really understand what's behind that, you know. Anyway. Yes, some questions in the back.
What do you do if someone's kind of having like a panic attack or something like that? Like, how do you communicate through that? So,
If you're observing another person with a panic attack, is that what you're?
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If you're, not if you, or if you are having a panic attack, or, you know, both sides, how do you deal with that?
That's a hard one, because you may not really understand what's going on with that person, but it sounds like you're saying you have some sense that they're anxious, which is an extreme anxiety, or type of extreme anxiety as a panic attack. I would just suggest sort of being with them, not really intervening as much as the intervention is to be there. It could be, hey, I'm with you till this is over. Frankly, it's probably going to be over in a few minutes, but when a person is experiencing that, it is very scary. But they do stop and they're not dangerous. If you know what it is, that's why I'm a little hesitant. You know, if it's a heart attack, you better call 911 or something, but maybe you know this other person and know that that's what's going on with them. But I think more your presence would be quite appropriate. But they may just have to go through it until it stops. So I guess I'm trying to say you don't want to be a therapist at that moment or to stop it. Other thoughts, questions?
This
Yeah.
kind of goes along with that. If someone is reacting, is that the same thing as them going into fight, flight, or freeze, or not necessarily?
Maybe. I don't know if you're able to determine that at that moment, but fight, flight, or freeze are some reactions to post-traumatic stress, or anyway, just saying you may not know exactly what's going on with the other person, and I guess I would caution against really, sort of goes along with a panic attack. You don't have to really figure out what's going on with them. You know, I'd ask yourself, you know, Lord, what do I do here? How can I be helpful? I think there are a couple more questions in the very back. Paul? Yeah.
Yeah, and something along the same lines as what Anna said about how do you get to that part that you're not good at. We were just talking actually downstairs about not having the vocabulary for things, so if you don't have words to describe your feelings. And when you were talking about it, you actually sort of hypothesized sentences, right? That you were, but then I realized it did include feeling intimidated, right? So this is probably not. It's just something that if the other person is the reverse, should you not expect to be able to ask them for help since they're good at the thing that you're not?
You're talking about thoughts versus feelings?
Yeah, like you said you and your husband are roughly opposite. And so if you're not feeling something, probably by now for you guys maybe, but you can ask him.
Yeah.
And he asks you, like,
Yeah.
well, what questions should I be answering? Which is more of a thought type of thing, right? But
If I'm hearing you correctly, Paul, I think you make a good point. We could help someone else to say, hey, tell me more how you feel about that. Yeah. Or to encourage them.
In that case, like, are you afraid or just uncertain or something like that? And maybe even uncertain, that doesn't sound like a feeling of band, but I'm good at the other one, so. Anyway, it was just the importance of vocabulary. I didn't think it was something you could actually get into. Can you offer any more distinctions between respond and react? I've heard people talk about react that's something that I've had people say that's like you said choice was one difference.
For response.
For response, right? Response is choice, react is sort of immediate or habit or knee jerk or something like that. Are there other ways of distinguishing between the two? Does response have more to do if you have any sort of awareness of what you are, was there something here, what you truly are, rather than sort of what you are just now? And react is what you are just now, like I'm really pissed or something like that. But respond is, well, but what I actually want to be and am in some sense is this other thing. Is that a helpful distinction?
Yeah, I think that is
Do you
a
have
helpful,
others?
Paul, because when we want to retrain ourselves from an unhealthy reaction to a healthy response, eventually we hope that response will be more natural, intuitive, happens easily. But in the moment, you may have to sort of, juggle things a little bit, or say, oh, my reaction is this, or say, hey, I'm sorry, I yelled at you, but hey, and then you choose your response, that's a little more healthy. Is that making sense?
Yeah, there's too much to do right now.
So it's a time thing, maybe. It doesn't have to be an hour, but you don't have to immediately fire off with whatever thought or feeling
Mhm.
is there at the moment. You can hold it before.
No, excellent, another excellent point. If the first step toward change may be to hold your tongue, as Scripture talks about. You might think of it too, as a process of change. You're going from A to B to C, you hope to get to Z, and you will if you keep working at it. But let's not worry about how long it takes or where someone else is. It's your own process with God as to you choosing to learn to do something differently here. Sorry, it makes me think of another example. I grew up in a real sweet Baptist home, and I didn't know any four-letter words till I went to college. And when I went to college, I'll try to make this quick. I learned a bunch of them, but there was one in particular. Let's call it boom. It wasn't boom, but I would say a lot. And especially when I was in a scary situation like driving and someone would swerve in front of me, and that boom came out. And one day I was, home from college on a break, and my sweet little mother was in the car with me, and we were driving along, and someone swerves in front of me, and boom, comes out of my mouth. And my mom was so gracious. She didn't say a word. She knew she hadn't raised me that way, and she was reflecting silence, I guess. But what happened, I was so convicted. My mom didn't chastise me, punish me. I would have been defensive had she done that. But I determined then, I'm not going to say that word anymore. Now, it wasn't instantaneous. I had to retrain myself. But the first step was to try not to say anything. Frankly, this is long story short, you may need to see a counselor to do this, but I said, hey, I'm studying behavioral science. I should know how to do this. And I did. I decided to replace that word with thank you, Jesus. There's a particular scripture that says thank the Lord in all things. And I learned over time that when something happened unexpectedly that was frightening, I said, thank you, Jesus. And when my kids were young, driving them to school one day, they're in their car seats, someone swerves in front of me. And thank you, Jesus, came out of my mouth. And I thanked him really, thank you so much. But I didn't say boom. And okay, I think we better move on to the next section. Interpersonal communication. How can you engage healthily with others and invite their healthy participation? So first, I want to differentiate between an argument and a discussion. The purpose of an argument is to win. Somebody wins, somebody loses. Even a nice argument with rules, we call a debate. It's usually not very healthy to argue, even if you do it nicely, when you're communicating with someone, because again, somebody wins, somebody loses. They're usually not healthy. What else tends to happen is you tend to escalate. If I make my point and you make your point and I make my point and you make your point, it's going to get loud and it's going to look ugly. Okay? So usually an escalation occurs when you're arguing, even if you start out nice. Instead, I would encourage you to define your interaction as a discussion. The purpose of a discussion is to understand one another, not to win. And you can guide someone. This can happen sort of naturally. If you're aware that you'd like to have a discussion, not an argument, you can simply say to someone, that's beginning to argue with you, say, I'd really like to understand where you're coming from. Can I just listen to you for a little bit? I really would like to understand your point of view. Oh, and then I'd like you to do the same for me. Would that be okay? So you can sort of initiate that. And that leads us to healthy discussion. What does a healthy discussion look like? Two parts. One is appropriate disclosure, and then active listening. Let's talk about disclosure. It involves sharing what you think and feel in an appropriate manner. It involves taking responsibility for your messages by using I statements. The protocol goes something like this. Here's what I think, here's what I feel, just wanted you to know. You take responsibility for your point of view by not only those I statements, but by being positive, respectful when you talk with the other person. Let me give you some examples of healthy disclosure or appropriate disclosure. I'm really feeling out of balance. While I love spending time with you, I also want to spend time with my friends. Could we talk about that sometime? Here's another one. I want to take a ski vacation, and I know you want to go to the beach. I'm really confused about what choice we should make. Did you know notice the I statements? I think, I feel, a lot of I statements there. So to clarify, the reason that it's best to use an I statement instead of you statements is that it helps you not to become critical. When you say you, that usually as a complaint or you're critical, right? Let me give you some examples. If you say, I worry when you don't let me know you're going to be late. Compare that to, you are always late. Okay. You see the difference? The first one, the emphasis is on how I feel about your behavior. I don't like your behavior, but the emphasis is on how I feel about it, not that you're being a jerk or something. You're not criticizing. So let's look at the other component of a healthy discussion, and that's active listening. What is active listening? It involves listening attentively without interrupting the other person. And you're going to let the other person know that you understand them by reflecting back what they said or asking a question. You're going to be in listen mode when they're in disclosure mode. How do you let them know that you understand what they're saying? You might paraphrase it back, but you could also summarize it. You could even say it verbatim, but that's sort of stiff and awkward. The point is, and you might ask a question. The point is, let it be natural, normal, but you're still in listen mode. How do I understand what this other person is saying? This active listening protocol lets the sender of the message know whether or not that message they sent is clearly understood by you. Okay? So let me give you some examples of active listening. These are some responses to the two examples I just gave you about disclosure. You'll recognize them. So here's a listener saying, oh, wow, you really feel out of balance in our relationship and you want more time with your friends. Is that right? That would be active listening. You reflect back what the person said to you and to let them know you understood what they said, where they're coming from. Here's a second one. If I understand what you said, you are concerned because you want to go skiing next winter, but you think I'd rather go to the beach. Is that right? See, that's a question at the end. Is that correct? Is that right? Check it out. And you'll know whether you got it or not, whether you understood. So the idea is to do these things rather naturally. Appropriate disclosure, active listening. You can interject them in your conversations, communications. You need to be sincere about it. Don't make it stilted, but be sincere. Now here's a caveat. You don't need to engage in disclosure and listening when you're talking about mundane things, routine things, like someone says, what time is it? You say 2 o'clock. You don't say, oh, you really want to know what time it is, huh? Don't do that. So you get it. Use your discernment. If someone says, hey, where do you want to go out to eat tonight? You say, I'd love to try that new Chinese restaurant. All right? And anyway, so just keep that in mind. But you'll notice when things start to get difficult, or you'll notice when you begin to argue a bit. That's when you might use listening and disclosure. And I'm going to give you even another tool. You might think of all these things as tools in your tool belt, and you want to be able to pull them out when you need them or at the right time and use discernment as to which tool do I use now. But there's a more structured technique, you see it on your handout, called speaker-listener technique. When something's really difficult, really emotional, really sensitive, or you can't talk about it or something, this structure will help you to talk about it. Hang on. So I guarantee you, when you choose to use this, you are making the choice to limit defensive reactions, escalations, criticisms, judgment, blaming. It can't happen if you follow the rules. And you're submitting yourself to a more caring, disciplined approach to communicating with someone about difficult issues. So you have the rules. The speaker has the floor. This is why I brought the floor. So it helps to have something physical when you use this technique to indicate who's the speaker and who's the listener. And I just like the floor, the speaker has the floor, get it, And you could use a pen or, a vase or something else. Doesn't matter, but something physical really helps. And it helps you remember, if you don't have the floor, quite literally, you're the listener. And the speaker keeps the floor while the listener is listening, paraphrasing back, indicating, using that active listening tool. And this physical object helps it keep clear, who's the speaker and who's the listener. You share the floor, meaning over the course of a conversation, one person may start, the speaker, but they may say a number of things. Maybe they say a sentence or two, and the listener, here's the speaker, and the listener reflects back, and then they say a few more sentences, and the listener reflects back. And you don't want to, talk 2 paragraphs, and the listener goes, I don't know what you said. You want to just do a few sentences at a time as a speaker. But it goes through several iterations before you trade places and give the floor to the other person, and they become the speaker, and you become the listener. So that's what sharing the floor is all about. During this, the rules for both of you, you don't do problem solving here. You're not doing conflict resolution. In fact, there's another talk on conflict resolution somewhere in this series, so come back for that one. But when you use this technique, you're going to focus on having a good discussion. Again, discussion, sharing what you think and feel in an appropriate manner, active listening. So you want to avoid coming to solutions to a problem prematurely. In fact, I submit to you, you're not going to do good problem solving or conflict resolution if you don't have a good discussion first, if you don't really understand each other first. You're not going to come up with a solution that works for you both. Again, the goal is to understand each other. So the speaker needs to speak for him or herself. You talk about your thoughts, feelings, concerns from your own point of view. Try to use those I statements. Don't mind read. Don't talk about the listener's point of view. Don't invalidate their point of view. You talk from your perspective. I said earlier, talk in small chunks. Keep what you say in manageable pieces to help the listener actively listen. Having the floor protects you from being interrupted. The listener's supposed to not interrupt you. But it's your responsibility as the speaker to pause. And that's the next step. Stop and let the listener paraphrase. As I said, a good rule of thumb is just a few sentences as a speaker. Your goal as a speaker is to help the listener understand your point of view. So if the listener says, when they paraphrase back to you, something like, oh, so you are really upset about A and B, right? And the speaker might graciously say, yes, I am upset about A and B, and also mention C, So the listener missed that, but you want to correct it, but graciously. That makes sense. Rules for the listener: paraphrase what you hear. You might ask a question to make sure you understand. You can ask the speaker to clarify if you don't understand. Don't rebut. Focus on the speaker's message. Don't offer your own opinions or thoughts when you're in the listener mode. Your task is to understand. So we're going to do an example. Don't worry, you don't have to talk and to do the talking, but I need a man and a woman up here to share the floor. Who shall I pick? Judith and Chris. Can you come on up? I'm putting you on the spot. Don't worry, I'm going to do the talking. You can just do like this or something. So this is Tessie and this is Peter. Peter has the floor, but let me tell you about Tessie and Peter. Tessie and Peter are in their mid-30s. and they have several young children. They disagree about whether to send the oldest child to preschool. And Jeremy here has been avoiding talking about it. So Tessie said, oh, you need to stand up here a little closer. You're going to be talking to each other. Just stand on each side of the table. So you can't hit each other, right? Okay. So Tessie says, I am getting really tired of leaving Jeremy's preschool up in the air. And I'm getting really angry about it, that you're putting it off. So Peter very wisely says, instead of withdrawing like he usually does, he says, yeah, I have been putting it off. Because every time we talk about it, we argue. And how about we try that speaker-listener technique we learned about? And Tessie agrees. So here they go. Peter now has the floor, and he says, I'm concerned about sending Jeremy to preschool. I'm not sure this is the year to do it. And Tessie says, now look at it. Remember, eye contact, right? Tessie says, oh, so you're not sure he's ready, correct? And Peter says, yes, that's it. He acts pretty young for his age. I'm not sure how he would do. And Tessie, as a listener, says, so you're worried that he wouldn't hold his own with the older acting kids, right? And Peter, the speaker, says, yeah, that's partly it. But I'm also not sure if he's ready to be away from you. And I don't want him to be overly dependent on you either. So Tessie, the listener, says, so you're feeling torn about him needing me a lot and him needing to be more independent. Peter says, that's right. Here, you take the floor. So now Tessie is a speaker, and she says, well, I appreciate what you're saying. Actually, I hadn't realized that you thought this much about it. I was worried that you didn't care. And Peter says, sounds like you're glad to hear that I'm concerned. And Tessie says, yes, I agree that this is not an easy decision. If we did put him in preschool this year, it would have to be just the right place. And Peter says, you're saying, remember, he's the listener. He says, you're saying that it would have to be the right preschool for it to be worth doing this year. And Tessie says, exactly. I think that it might be worth trying if we could find a great environment for him. And Peter, the listener, says, see, the floor helps you know. He's the listener, right? He says, so you would try it if we found just the right setting, correct? And Tessie says, well, I might try it. I'm not sure if I'm ready to say that I really would try it. And Peter says, oh, so you're not ready to say you would definitely want to do it, even with the perfect preschool. And Tessie says, right, that's right. And you take the floor again. Okay, and that's it. That make sense, what they did?
Well, I want to take the floor.
My floor.
So there was no resolution.
Not at that point, no. No, not at that point. And again, the purpose at this point with a healthy discussion isn't to resolve the issue. It's to understand each other so that when you get into problem-solving techniques, which I'm not getting into today, you'll be able to come up with a good solution that works for you both. You're really looking for the win-win, what works for you both. Anyway, which I won't get into. So, yes, question?
I just want to make sure that something that I think I actually saw, and if it was rebuttal, then I can tell from the outline that that's not something part of it. But it actually also looked like you might have, well, of course you'd have multiple conversations, but I mean, of the sort of conversations that we're talking about, because Tessie never said, like, well, let me tell you what I think is great about preschool.
Mm-hmm.
It was sort of like Peter, capital P, and then Tessie, like a lowercase t, kind of. And it was the Peter conversation. And it seemed like there were actually two chunks, that the second one would take place maybe at another time, where if Tessie, because when you first presented the situation, I kind of saw, well, Peter kind of didn't want it and Tessie kind of did. They didn't really talk about Tessie wanting what she wanted, which is, it sounded like there was a second part that not only was it like the right kinds of back and forth, but the actual like nature of the conversation was, this was Peter's conversation. And I don't mean that as like she's not participating in it, but that they were talking about Peter's concerns for not doing so, and that a conversation about Tessie's desire for it was actually a separate conversation.
Could be, but what I tried to illustrate is both people were disclosing, sharing, both were listening, and Tessie was ambivalent. So again, she'd been pushing more to talk about it, as opposed to,
So you didn't
let's,
need to, sorry, I'm sorry.
no, it's okay. And this is just a chunk, and you're right, there probably would be several different conversations. They may say, hey, we've talked about this enough now, let's think about what we've each said, let's keep talking, keep trying to understand each other. But I think Tessie's anger had more to do with, initially, Peter's not willing to talk about it.
Talking
Yeah,
about it,
yeah.
Not that she was so much
Right.
in favor of it, okay.
And you saw she was free to share, I'm not quite sure. Maybe she didn't know that till she said it. I don't know.
Right, there was a little bit, but it still seemed responsive to what he was saying, that's why, and I had that earlier assumption about the basis of it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I think the point of giving you an illustration is just to help you see how it works, how it can be pretty fluid. And I'll try to go quick because we're running out of time. They did show respect to each other, and they made it emotionally safe for each other to talk. What does that mean? It means emotionally safe means you trust that you're not going to be criticized for what you say. You're not going to be punished when you share your thoughts and feelings. You're creating that atmosphere of emotional safety with them. Mutuality, let's talk about an invitation versus demand. And actually initially Tessie demanded to talk about it. Did you notice that? When she first said, I'm angry about this. That's usually not good. But Peter did turn it around into an invitation. Well, how about if we do this speaker-listener thing? An invitation to talk. That's what's healthy. For a discussion to proceed, it should be mutually agreed upon to do it, not someone feeling forced into it or pressured. So you can ask yourself, am I being pushy? Am I pressuring? Or do I feel pressured by someone else? You can stop doing that and say, extend that invitation to talk. When you extend an invitation, by definition, an invitation can be accepted or declined, right? Get an invitation to a wedding, you can accept or decline. So think of it that way. And if both people understand that, if someone declines the invitation, share your reason, have a good reason. Because if this is a matter of importance to either of you, you probably should be talking about it, but maybe not right at that time. You might suggest an alternate time to talk.
Do you have some good phrases of disengagement?
I do.
Healthy disengagement?
Yep.
Like with the person that demands,
Yeah.
they feel this way right now, therefore you have to be
Mm-hmm.
involved in that, rather than we need some time
Yeah.
to figure something out.
And I think just to back up, if there's someone you relate to regularly, you might talk about the difference between an invitation and a demand and how that might work more healthily. And that if someone extends an invitation to you, you want to consider it an invitation, not a demand. Even if they demand it, you could consider it an invitation and say, it's really not a good time for me to talk right now, but I'd be happy to talk to you Tuesday at 10 or something like that. It is good to give that explanation. And I just made up one, but here's some others. I don't wish to talk about this right now. I need some time to think about it. So something legitimate. Or another example might be, I know you wish to talk about what happened at Grandpa's today, but I have some other things to get done. How about if we talk at 8 o'clock? So you might suggest an alternative time if you can. If you can't, you can still say, I don't know, I do need to think about this, but I will get back to you. Something like that. Empathic listening. Oh, sorry, another question.
Sorry.
All right.
Might that not be sort of seen as sort of like, here's this very important thing to me that you're not finding presently important? Is there a way to do any kind of, is there a third option, such as like, you can say, well, listen, I'm not ready to talk to you about it, but I could listen to you for a few minutes or something like that.
If you choose to do that, that's okay. But again, just be clear. Just be clear about what you're willing to do right now and what you're not willing to do and why. So there's another type of listening. I talked about active listening, and I apologize for going over, but we should be done by 1:30. Empathic listening. Let's start with a story. A teenage girl comes home from school. She's angry, upset. She tells her mom that another girl sneered at her and excluded her from the lunch table. The mom tries to come up with some ideas of how to handle the problem. It doesn't go over very well. The girl's emotion changes. She seems kind of tired and dismissive, and then she walks away. And this happens a lot. After consulting with a counselor, the mom is prepared for this the next time. The teen girl comes home from school crying, and she says she hates school, and all the girls in class are turning on her for no reason. And the mom says, "Oh, honey, I'm so sad that's happening to you. Tell me more." And the girl goes on complaining. And the mom says, "That sounds really hard." "It is," the girl replies. And instead of shutting down, as usual, the girl continues to open up to her mom. This different way of communication, though simple, is shockingly effective. It's usually you use it when a family member or friend is struggling emotionally. Using phrases like these could unlock a deeper connection, and it's far more powerful than giving advice. And I think we as individuals need to have the courage to respond with humility, as Father talked about today. When a loved one's in crisis, it may require us putting aside our own thoughts about a solution, our own thoughts about how to fix the problem, and be empathic. Listen. And you have on your handout how to do it. Here's some steps. First one, hold off offering a solution. The second one, use these 7 words instead. Tell me more, go on, what else? You can memorize those 7 words. These words give a person space to tell their story, to feel loved and accepted, no matter how heavy the things they are that they want to share. 3, practice emotional hospitality. What is that? It's when you create a comforting environment with your presence. It invites the other person to open up. You don't have to pressure yourself to say just the right thing when someone is unburdening their pain. It's as if you're saying with your body language, eye contact, back to all that, tell me something, I'm here. And then listen, really listen. That's your role. 4th, tune in. Love can be quiet and still. What does tune in mean? When the going gets tough for a loved one, we tend to have a strong urge to do something, to jump into action mode. But if we tune into their emotion, their mood, and absorb it, not minimizing it, we can really love that person. Let me give another example. A man was in the hospital near the end of his life. His adult daughter, who was visiting, noticed that he was very, very agitated. And instead of calling a nurse for medication or trying to get him to go to sleep, she sat down and observed his mood and asked him about it. She didn't try to fix the agitation. He started opening up about his life's regrets, things that were still weighing on him. He said he didn't visit his brother-in-law when he was sick, and he should have thanked his lacrosse coach for helping him not drop out of college. He talked about things like this. that he regretted. And the adult daughter didn't reassure him, didn't minimize his misgivings. She listened. This was really a type of confession, wasn't it? And when he was finished, he leaned back on his pillow and he said, I'm good. He was at peace. I'd like to leave you with a quote from St. Seraphim of Seraph. It's on your handout. You cannot be too gentle, too kind. Shun even to appear harsh in your treatment of each other. Joy, radiant joy, streams from the face of one who gives and kindles joy in the heart of one who receives. Your takeaway, hopefully, from part 2 is that a cooperative, respectful culture can be developed and strengthened in our communications with others. And the overall takeaway, hopefully, humility and love, there you have it. This is everything from St. Paisios the Anthonite. Yes, I do want a few minutes for more question and discussion on part 2, but if someone needs to leave, feel free. I'm sorry it's gone over a little bit, but if not, we will do questions and reflection. And Diana.
Well, what is the best thing to do if the person who you are talking to immediately interrupts you? Like you'll say something and that person will immediately say, oh, that happened to me too, or, puts his or her experience about it, so you never get a chance to finish your sentence even.
Great question. I guess I'd say 2 things. One is, yeah, it shuts down your communication, your disclosure. It's unhealthy. And so you may just stop, because you realize the other person really isn't interested in what you're saying. However, the other thing you might do is to request it. It depends on who it is, the situation, your discernment. But you might say, hey, I'd really like to share more of what's going on with me. I wonder if you could just listen for a bit. You could be appropriately assertive about it, to request that. Your choice. But again, bottom line, we can't control another person. You can make a request, not a demand, but a request. And maybe they take you up on it, maybe they don't. Maybe they try and they keep telling you about their story and you give up. But you could try. Yes, question there.
Can you tell me again how you defined emotionally safe?
I guess 2 ways. A person can feel emotionally safe when the other person creates an atmosphere of emotional safety. So it sort of goes both ways. But creating that atmosphere means you don't criticize or interrupt or judge the person. You're in that listen mode and you're accepting. You may disagree with the person, but that's neither here nor there at that point. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
A little bit? Yeah, just think about that. But you have the responsibility to create that atmosphere. But hopefully you feel it, experience it with someone else. You might request it from them, or help them learn what that is. Yes?
So, are you saying that in this sort of listening stage, you're trying to understand each other, and then maybe in a further stage, let's say the conflict resolution stage, then there might be a time for something like criticism or something like more direct speeches?
Well, in problem solving, I wouldn't say you can get into criticism then, because generally that is unhealthy. But we're differentiating between the discussion phase, where the goal is to understand each other, and later, when you get into problem solving, I'll just say it in a nutshell. Really, you're going to feel safe enough to brainstorm some possible solutions. Not if you start out with, I think A, and the other person thinks B. If you have an argument, A is going to win or B is going to win. But if you have a healthy, this is just in a nutshell, problem-solving approach, you're going to be open to letting go of A and B. You're going to be open to, if you understand each other, maybe the solution that works for you both is C, D, E, F, or G. Or maybe it's A modified, or maybe it's B modified. Maybe it's A, but it's not because A won. It's because you understand each other and the other person goes, oh, wow, now that we've talked about it, I really do like A best. They choose. Does that help?
Okay, so there's really no place for criticism.
Nope. No, think of it in another way. You have your own opinion. You may disagree with them. Sort of like the worry when you come home late. You know, when you say you're always late with a certain tone and your anger, you're criticizing. It doesn't mean you pretend like you don't care about them being late. You do. But instead of criticizing, you say, I really worry about you when you're late, or I really don't like your lateness. It's still I don't like. You're chronically late. You don't criticize. I know that's a hard one.
Say never and always.
Well,
That's what I was just gonna say.
well,
That's actually been a good tool for me over 24 years of marriage, is to learn how to live in never and always.
right.
When you start with you never, or you always, well, no, they don't actually always do that. So
There's never
I've learned
all
how
these
to-
always and nevers, right?
how to redirect that to
Yeah.
there's something like, when you're late, it makes me
Yeah,
feel this, or it makes me think this.
yeah,
Instead
And
of
there's-
you never, blah, 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 blah.
right. Again, there's constructive criticism. I just don't like to use that term because it gets mixed up with the unhealthy criticism. It just means, how could you be loving about it when you say, I really don't like you being late, Can we talk about it? And instead of, otherwise you get into this punitive mode and you hope the other person will change, and they never do because they don't like you harping on them all the time, right? Other questions? Yes.
Is the condemnation that has no place, right? It reminded me of something from Dallas Willard years ago, that the world does not need one more ounce of condemnation.
Well, excellent point. Criticism tends to be condemnation, doesn't it? And again, we're back to putting the other person down, that you're better than they are. So that's why the waters get sort of muddy there. That's why I say avoid criticism. Try to say it in a different way. It doesn't mean you like them being late. So, one more question, or two more questions. Go ahead.
How do I get that recorded?
I'm not sure. My understanding is it'll eventually be posted on either our YouTube channel, and maybe you can click onto it from the website. But
Most of these usually get put on the media section of the website.
okay, so probably something like that. But I'm not sure the process or how long it takes. Chris, yes.
I didn't want to miss the opportunity to say thank you, Brittany.
All right, and thanks for being patient.